In the quiet town of Pines Grove, there is a forest that no one dares enter. Even in daylight, the woods feel unnerving, with twisted trees that seem to lean closer together, casting long shadows over the path. The locals have a simple name for it, the Whispering Woods. Over the years, there have been stories, tales of hikers who vanished without a trace, strange noises that carried on the wind, and voices that would speak your name, luring you deeper into the trees. The older generations warn the younger ones to stay away, especially on Halloween night, when the forest seemed more alive. Amy, Josh, Claire, and David were 4 high school friends who had grown up hearing the stories. Like many teenagers, they were skeptical of the legends, dismissing them as old wives' tales meant to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. The group, particularly Josh, had always been fascinated by the supernatural, but refused to believe anything until they had proof. So, one Halloween, when everyone else was headed to parties or trick-or-treating, they decided to head into the Whispering Woods and stay until midnight. Equipped with flashlights, phones, and a strong sense of adventure, the group ventured into the woods just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air grew cooler and a light mist began to form, curling around the base of the trees. For the first mile, nothing out of the ordinary happened. The woods were silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves or the snap of a twig underfoot. But as they went deeper, something changed. It started as a whisper, so soft that they could have mistaken it for the wind. "Did you hear that?" Amy asked, stopping in her tracks. The others paused, listening intently. There it was again, a faint murmur, almost like the trees themselves were speaking. "Probably just the wind," Josh said with a shrug, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. They continued on, but the whispering persisted, growing louder the further they walked. The whispers were incoherent at first, just a jumble of sounds, but then they began to take shape, forming words, phrases, and then something far more terrifying. Their names. Amy, she stopped dead in her tracks. "Did you guys hear that?" "Hear what?" David asked. "My name... It just said my name." Before anyone could respond, another whisper came through the trees. This time it was Claire's name, followed by Josh's. The whispers were coming from all directions, surrounding them, pressing in closer. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore," Claire said, her voice trembling. "Let's head back." But as they turned to retrace their steps, the path behind them was gone. The trees seemed to have shifted, closing off the trail they had followed. It was as if the forest itself was alive, moving to trap them. "What the hell?" Josh muttered, spinning in circles as he tried to find any recognizable landmark. "We didn't go that far. We should be able to see the edge of the woods, but there was nothing. Just endless trees, their gnarled branches twisting together like skeletal hands." Panic began to set in. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They no longer sounded distant. They were right there with them, brushing past their ears, filling their minds. Each step they took seemed to bring them deeper into the forest rather than out. Every direction they tried led them back to the same spot, a small clearing with a strange stone altar in the center. The altar was old, covered in moss and engraved with symbols none of them recognized. The air around it was colder and the whispers were louder here, almost like a chorus. It felt wrong, ancient, as if it didn't belong in the modern world. "We need to leave now," David said, backing away from the altar. But no matter which way they ran, they always ended up back at the clearing. It was as if the forest was playing with them, toying with their minds. Amy's breathing grew ragged as the whispers became screams. She clutched her head, trying to block out the noise, but it was no use. The others weren't faring much better. Josh dropped his flashlight in a panic, the beam casting wild shadows as it rolled across the ground. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the whispering stopped. The silence was deafening. They stood frozen, afraid to move, waiting for whatever would come next. The ground beneath their feet began to shift, the soil loosening, as if something was moving beneath it. Slowly the stone altar cracked open, revealing a dark, yawning pit beneath it. From the pit, a cold wind blew, carrying with it the smell of decay and death. And then they heard it again. Their names, called out from the darkness below. One by one, they began to disappear. First Claire, who was pulled into the pit by invisible hands. She didn't even have time to scream. Then David, whose eyes went wide with terror as he was dragged toward the altar by something unseen. Amy and Josh were the last ones left, standing frozen in fear as the whispers surrounded them once more. Josh tried to run, but the forest wouldn't let him go. The trees seemed to reach out for him, their branches wrapping around his arms and legs, pulling him toward the pit. Amy was alone now, standing at the edge of the clearing, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispers were deafening now, louder than ever before. And then, just as suddenly as it had all started, the forest went silent once again. Amy collapsed to the ground, sobbing as the altar sealed itself shut, trapping her friends inside forever.
The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of metal and dust. Shadows stretched long and deep inside the factory. Giant machines hulked in the gloom, silent but menacing. This was the night shift at Darrow Industries, F. Manilow Street. And I was the new guy. Darrow Industries, a company with a past as long and dark as the shadows in its factory. Built in 1922, the place had seen its share of tragedies. Workplace accidents, hushed-up deaths, whispers of something sinister lurking beneath the floorboards. Most of the workers avoided the night shift, their faces tight with unspoken fear when I mentioned it. I should have listened. My footsteps echoed in the cavernous space, the only sound besides the distant hum of electricity. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter. Even the stale air seemed to crackle with an unseen energy, a palpable tension that sent goosebumps crawling across my skin. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something move, a flicker of shadow, gone as quickly as it appeared. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the feeling. It was just the wind, I told myself. Or maybe a rat. The place was old, after all. But deep down, a primal fear stirred within me, the feeling that I wasn't alone. My name is Jack. 2 weeks ago, I was desperate for work, any work. So, when Darrow Industries offered me a position on the night shift, I jumped at the chance. Now, standing here in the echoing darkness, I wasn't so sure. The foreman, a burly man with a permanent scowl etched onto his face, had shown me the ropes. Or rather, the lack of them. "Just keep an eye on things," he'd grunted, avoiding my gaze. "And don't mind the noises. This place is old, you know." He didn't need to tell me twice. My job was simple enough. Patrol the factory floor, make sure everything was in order. It sounded easy enough, but there was something about the place that set my teeth on edge. The way the shadows seemed to dance, the way the air grew cold in certain spots, and the silence. It wasn't a peaceful silence, but a heavy, expectant one. I continued my rounds, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The only light came from the dim bulbs hanging overhead, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and twist like living things. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind through the broken windows, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The hours crawled by. Each tick of the clock seemed to amplify the silence, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I tried to focus on my job, to ignore the feeling of being watched, but it was like trying to outrun my own shadow. I started to notice things, small things at first, tools misplaced, shadows moving in the periphery of my vision. Once, I could have sworn I heard a whisper, a faint, raspy voice that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest, but the sound was gone. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but the feeling persisted. It was like something was trying to get my attention, to draw me deeper into the heart of the factory. I stopped by one of the machines, its metal surface cold and damp beneath my touch. It was a hulking monstrosity, a relic from a bygone era. I could almost feel the history radiating from it, the countless hours of work, the sweat, the blood that had gone into its creation. One night, the noises started. They were faint at first, just a series of taps and scrapes. I dismissed them as rats or the building settling, but as the nights went on, they grew louder, more insistent. One night, I heard a crash. It came from the far end of the factory, near the old assembly line. My heart leaped into my throat. I grabbed my flashlight, my hand trembling as I fumbled for the switch. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. But there was nothing there. "Hello!" My voice echoed in the empty space, sounding small and lost. Silence, except for the frantic pounding of my own heart. I waited, listening, but the only sound was the creaking of the old building. I told myself it was probably just a shelf collapsing under its own weight, but the feeling of unease lingered. It was like the factory itself was breathing, its ancient lungs wheezing out a symphony of unsettling sounds. The feeling of being watched intensified. Everywhere I went, it was there. A presence lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, a cold breath on the back of my neck. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye. Flickers of movement, shadows that seemed to dart behind machinery when I turned my head. One night, I swore I saw a figure standing at the end of one of the aisles. tall and slender, shrouded in shadow. But when I turned my flashlight on it, there was nothing there. I began to dread my shifts. The loneliness of the factory, once merely unsettling, now felt oppressive, suffocating. The silence was no longer empty, but filled with whispers and unseen movements. I was trapped in a nightmare, my senses on high alert, my nerves stretched taut as piano wire. I tried talking to some of the other workers about it, but they just shook their heads, their faces grim. "You get used to it," one old-timer told me, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of fear and resignation, "or you go crazy." One night I saw it clearly, the ghostly figure. I was making my rounds, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness when I saw it standing at the end of aisle 4. It was the same figure I'd glimpsed before, tall and slender, but this time I could make out more details. It appeared to be a woman. Her form was shrouded in a long, flowing gown that seemed to absorb the light. Her hair was long and dark, cascading down her back like a waterfall of ink, but it was her face that chilled me to the bone. Her features were pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow sockets that seemed to burn with a cold, ethereal fire. Her lips were pulled back in a silent scream, a rictus of pure terror frozen on her face. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. For a moment our eyes met, and in that instant, I felt a surge of pure, primal fear, unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the figure was gone, vanished into thin air. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding against my ribs, my breath caught in my throat. The silence was deafening. The whispers started a few nights later. They were faint at first, like the rustling of leaves, but they grew stronger each night. I would be walking my rounds, the silence pressing in on me from all sides, and then I would hear them. Whispers just on the edge of my hearing, murmuring my name. "Jack, Jack." The voice was soft, feminine, but with an underlying current of something cold and menacing. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, slithering around the machinery, seeping out of the very walls themselves. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was just the wind or the old building groaning under its own weight, but the whispers persisted, growing louder, more insistent. Sometimes they would morph into words, phrases that sent chills down my spine. "Help me! They won't let me leave!" I would spin around, my heart racing, but there was never anything there. Just the endless rows of silent machines and the oppressive darkness. I was starting to lose it. The lack of sleep, the constant fear, the whispers that seemed to burrow into my brain, it was all taking its toll. Desperate for answers, I started asking questions. The older workers, the ones who had been at Darrow Industries for years, they knew something. I could see it in their eyes, the way they avoided my gaze, the way their faces tightened when I mentioned the strange occurrences.
Finally, one night, over coffee in the break room, one of the older workers, a man named Sal, broke down. He told me everything, the history of the factory, the accidents, the deaths, and the ghost that haunted its halls. Manilow Street wasn't always a factory, he said. It used to be a textile mill, back in the 1920s. And the ghost, the woman in the white gown, she was a worker who had died in a horrific accident. Her name was Maria.
One night, Maria was working late, trying to finish an order. The machines were old and dangerous, prone to malfunctioning. And on that fateful night, one of the machines malfunctioned, trapping Maria inside. Her screams were swallowed by the roar of the factory, her pleas for help going unheard.
By the time someone found her, it was too late. She had been crushed to death, her body mangled beyond recognition. The factory owners, eager to avoid a scandal, covered up the accident. Maria's death was ruled an unfortunate mishap, and life at the factory went on.
But Maria's spirit refused to rest. Trapped in the place of her death, she wandered the halls, her anguished cries echoing through the empty factory. Over the years, there were countless reports of strange occurrences. Workers claimed to see Maria's ghostly figure, to hear her blood-curdling screams. Some even reported feeling her icy touch, her cold breath on their necks. The factory changed hands several times, but the stories persisted. Each new owner tried to explain away the occurrences, to rationalize the irrational. But the truth remained. Manalo Street was haunted, and Maria, the woman in white, was still searching for peace.
"You're in danger, son," he said, his voice low and urgent. "That thing, it feeds on fear. You need to get out while you still can.
I sat there stunned. All this time, the answer had been right in front of me. The history of the factory, the whispers, the ghostly figure, it all made sense now. I was trapped in a nightmare, and the only way out was to confront my fear head-on. That night, I went to work with a new sense of purpose. I was no longer just a night watchman. I was an investigator, a witness to the tragic tale of Maria, and I was determined to help her find peace. As I made my rounds, I paid close attention to my surroundings. I listened for the whispers, searching for any clue that might lead me to Maria. And then I saw it, a single white rose lying on the floor in the exact spot where Maria had been killed. I picked up the rose, its petals soft and velvety against my fingers. It was as if Maria was trying to communicate with me, to lead me somewhere. I closed my eyes, focusing on the rose, on the feeling of sadness and despair that emanated from it. And then I saw her. Maria. She was standing at the end of the aisle, her form shimmering like heat haze. Her eyes, once filled with terror, now held a glimmer of hope. She reached out to me, her hand passing through mine, sending a chill down my spine. And then I heard her voice. It was no longer a whisper, but a soft, mournful sigh.
"Help me," she pleaded, her voice echoing in my head. "Tell them my story. Don't let them forget me."
I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes.
"I promise," I whispered back. "I won't let you down."
As soon as the words left my lips, Maria's form began to fade. She smiled sadly at me, her eyes filled with gratitude. And then, she was gone. The white rose in my hand withered and turned to dust, crumbling between my fingers. I stood there for a long moment, the silence washing over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound sense of sadness and loss. Maria's story touched me deeply, and I knew I had to keep my promise to her. I never saw Maria again, but I could still feel her presence in the factory. It was a comforting presence now, no longer menacing or frightening. She was at peace. I continued to work at Darrow Industries for a few more weeks, but I knew I couldn't stay there forever. The memory of Maria, of her tragic fate, was too much to bear. I quit my job, packed my bags, and left F. Manilow Street behind. But I never forgot Maria. I kept my promise to her, sharing her story with anyone who would listen. And every year, on the anniversary of her death, I would return to F. Manilow Street, leaving a single white rose at the foot of the old machine where she had lost her life. The factory stands empty now, a decaying monument to a forgotten tragedy. But the memory of Maria, the woman in white, lives on. A reminder that even in the darkest of places, hope and compassion can prevail.
This is my first time to share my scary experience. This is about my uncle. We went on a vacation to Cebu in the Philippines to visit my family. When we got there, we saw our aunts, cousins, my grandmother and grandfather, and also my uncle Dodong. We were having a wonderful time buying food, going to the beach, and going crazy at the disco. I even got to ride a carabao. One evening while we were chilling out on the beach, my cousins told me about the Makukulong. Also known as a Philippine witch, the Makukulong uses black magic and other sorcery such as candle lighting rituals, scrying, reciting spells, and concocting potions. They said that if I bump into someone, especially old people, don't look them in the eyes and just walk straight on. And when a stranger pats you on the shoulder, you have to pat them back because they may have put a curse on you and you have to pat them back on their shoulders to reverse the curse. One morning, my cousin cooked noodles for us for breakfast. While we were eating, my uncle woke up, went into the bathroom to take a shower, and got dressed. When he came out, he walked over to a mirror on the wall near to where we were eating. He was looking in the mirror while he was combing his hair. When I saw his reflection in the mirror, I saw him headless. I cried out loud. I was so scared, and I told my family what I just saw. My grandmother covered his head with a black cloth and hit him on the head. She then asked my uncle to take off his clothes. They burned the clothes and told my uncle not to go outside that day because something bad was going to happen. The next day, my uncle woke up early and said that he was going to church to pray for what happened yesterday because he was scared too. He got dressed and left. It was many hours later when our grandfather got a call. It was our neighbor. She said that my uncle is dead. He got hit by a 10-wheeler truck and his head was crushed. It's been 5 months and I still can't get over it. I'm the one who saw him headless. I'm still scared.